about our things. And so, but we got to elect officers for next year. On your seat is a list of the officers who have volunteered. I volunteered to be president again. Bob Kerr is going to handle programs. Julie Hermes is going to be workshops. John Davis is going to be membership. Phil Horney, who's going to be our webmaster and treasurer. Frank, no, Chuck, where's Frank? Oh, there's Frank. He just walked in time. Sorry, Frank. Frank's going to be secretary. Mark Landis, who's a new member, is going to be our recording secretary. And Joanne is still past president. She'll be past president, Mike, and past president. So, if there's anyone else who would like to volunteer to be on one of the officers, go ahead and put your name down. But let me tell you, if you put your name down, you're going to find something. We will find something for you to do. So, because there's a lot of things coming up, and we're going to need a lot of help this year. So, anyway, just please put an affirmative mark on it and pass the ballot in. Or if you want to put somebody else in, go ahead and write their name in too. Second, the next meeting, July meeting, it's going to be here. We're going to have our picnic. At that picnic, we'll be raffling off 3 or 4 trees. There will be a couple of the Green Island ficus from the beginner's class, as well as I've asked Scott to supply a couple trees. I'll pick them up Saturday, and they'll be a little bit nicer trees. I'd also request that if you come to the meeting, it's open to yourself and your family. It's not just you, so bring your family along. That you bring one side, either a dessert or a side dish. Thank you, side dish. So last year I said we'll do it alphabetically. Just pick one. That was too confusing for me. If you're coming to the workshop on Saturday, we had a little problem this morning. We found out that the Civic Garden Center is actually having an event here this weekend. So it's going to be at the White Oak Garden Center. Julie will get you the address and get you all that information, or I have it also. So if you're going to it, see one of us, and I'll personally give you the address so you don't get lost.
Can I ask who here is coming Saturday? Yeah.
Okay. See us and we'll give you the information.
Yeah, that way I don't have to send out an email just to those.
Yeah, to those. So it is
I'll
at
email
the
everybody
White
else.
Oak Garden Center. It's over in White Oak. We're a couple miles south of Northgate and just north of 74. We'll get you the address. It's on Cheviot Road. So, if anyone come to the beginner's class, or anyone signed up for the beginner's class and didn't show up, we can either get you a refund or we can get you your tree and your soil and pot and help you repot it. So, is anyone?
Well, I have a friend of mine was coming, and I've already talked to her. I got her tree. I took it that day,
Okay.
and we're going to have our little private.
Okay.
We love any excuse to get together, so she'll be doing it.
Okay. Okay.
And just one more thing, there's 2 more openings for Saturday.
Okay.
So if anybody is like, wants to come, let me know.
Okay. Okay.
Question, on elections, what do we do, fill out the ballot, put it in a box, or do a voice
Just
vote?
put it on the.
Do a
Put it
voice
on.
vote, yeah.
Okay.
I just want to
Yeah,
know
that's
how
fine.
you want to do it.
That's fine. I was just going to say, everybody mark affirmed, or do you want to take a voice vote, or does anyone? Are there any write-in candidates? Would anyone else like to volunteer for the executive committee?
Another question might be, is there anybody objects to us voting on the full slate at one time rather than each name individually? Would anybody object to that?
I'm gonna be voting for the whole slate.
Second. Is there a second?
I'll say.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll follow through on this next year.
What is the workshop this Saturday?
Saturday's workshop with Scott, who's doing the demonstration.
Tropicals?
Yes.
So, okay.
I think you got a variety of trees.
Yeah, he's got samples of the trees over here.
Okay.
Yep.
So we'll get a chance to look at them before you leave.
And Scott, there will be some additional trees at the workshop on Saturday?
Oh, I'll probably bring twice as much because I would rather have people have too much to choose from than feel like they have to settle on something.
Sounds good.
That being said, I will talk about some of those here real quick too, just to kind of tell you what's what.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Sounds good.
And the air conditioning is on. I stepped outside and it is hotter outside than it is in there. They turned it off on us before we showed up. It was like, great. Any other questions? Okay, I have one more thing on the picnic. The club will furnish the entree and the executive committee, all you guys who were just elected, we're going to supply the drinks.
Okay.
And all you guys that were on there, you can bring drinks too.
Hard drinks, soft drinks.
Soft drinks, if you want to bring hard drinks, I'll drink them.
I just want to know what you want.
Yeah, soft drinks or beer or, I don't know what they allow here, but you know, I've got some extra beer and Coke.
If it's here,
Oh, okay, so
No,
if you want to,
G&T sounds pretty good. for me.
yeah, it sounds like I get some bourbon. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Scott. Scott, oh, go ahead, Bob.
Just real quick on the raffle, we are raffling off the tree, right?
That tree, it's your tree. Whatever you want to do with it. So.
Like normal, we're raffling off the tree. Chris did donate junipers for a second prize, so we'll draw the first one for the big tree and then a second one for the second tree, and you get to choose one of these three. And just make sure everybody knows how the raffle works. I give you the strip of tickets, you take half and put the other half in the bucket, and that's what we draw from. You don't have to write anything on it, just keep the other half.
how much are they?
Oh, so they're $1 a piece, or for $5 you get 6. So
6
increments
or
of 5
$5.
you get 6.
Okay? Scott.
All right. All right. Well, thank you. I've got I got one. So, and on top of that, I think my voice usually carries halfway decent anyhow. I think it's more for the benefit of the camera more than anything. But just quickly introduce myself. My name is Scott Yelich. I've been doing bonsai for around 30 years now. I own Eagle Creek Bonsai on the northwest side of Indianapolis, which I've been doing that for about 13 years. As far as stuff goes, like I'm actually the president currently of the bonsai club in Indianapolis because I pulled the short straw last time, I guess. So anyhow,
That's how it works.
yeah, that's usually how it works. But with bonsai, although today I'm mainly going to be talking about tropicals and the use of tropical bonsai or whatever. Honestly, my personal collection of stuff. I've got everything, so I mean, I do have junipers and pines and maples and all that kind of stuff. But all that being said, I still admit I tend to like tropicals more than just about anything. So that's what I do a greater amount of, and most of the time when I'm teaching or whatever, that's what I tend to lean most of my stuff towards. One of the main reasons why I personally really get into tropicals is because, like a gazillion years ago when I started doing bonsai, I'm from a really small town, and it was pre-internet. And when I was trying to learn bonsai, because I saw the Karate Kid and thought the Mr. Miyagi's trees are really cool and all that kind of stuff, like a lot of people did. So I, went to Walmart, got my juniper tree, stuck it in potting soil in a pot that didn't have a hole in it, and stuck it by my window, and it died, and like a lot of other ones do. So then I bought another one and treated it the same way, and it died. And that's a really common problem, and that's why, and I think it's real rough for a bonsai starting out. It's like anymore, we've got the internet, being in a larger city like this, you do have access to clubs. But even in Indianapolis, where I am now, I'll mention that there's a bonsai club, and to somebody, and they're like, "Gosh, I never knew there was a bonsai club in Indianapolis." When the truth is, the club's been there for like 54 years. It's been in existence longer than I've been in existence, but still a lot of people don't know about it. So people tend to find the clubs by chance, usually long after they've already started, messing with bonsai. Now, myself personally, too, one of the reasons why initially I wanted to learn how to do bonsai anyhow was actually to teach myself patience and kind of be a stress reliever and teach myself patience. But then the first guy that I managed to find that did bonsai, he tended to specialize in tropicals, and I got the tropical bug big time because, truthfully, even though I did this initially to try to teach myself patience, I want to be patient as quick as I possibly can most of the time. And a lot of times with bonsai, we can, the tropicals, they usually grow faster. We can do more things at any one time, so we can be a little more aggressive with them. And a lot of times, you tend to get more tree in less time. And for people that are new too, it's like, man, I understand, like, you get excited wanting to do stuff, and like I said, going back to the junipers and stuff like that, which, junipers like those are fantastic bonsai, and I love working with them. But, sometimes people get a little nuts with them. Like in the springtime, taught a class on basically potting them when we were doing, deciduous and conifer, we were doing outdoor trees. So, gentleman gets this tree and gets it potted and everything. But I told him, it's like, okay, we can pot it now, but it's like, man, you don't want to try, really wiring it or doing anything really serious to it until more like October or something like that, because they need they need some time to recoup. Well, he brought the tree back to me, not to buy another one, but just to show me that he had killed it, because although I told him we needed to wait on this thing, he got it excited. He trimmed it all, wired it, ginned a bunch of branches, and did all this stuff just weeks after potting it. And he overdid it and he killed it. Where a lot of times in the case of tropical bonsai, I can take a tree, I can defoliate it, pot it, wire it, and do everything pretty much in one shot, and it's going to flush back and ask for more. Because a lot of times, they grow sometimes almost 3 times as fast and stuff. And like before, we had a discussion about, well, what kind of wire do you use on these? You want to use copper, you want to use aluminum or whatever. And I said, well, for tropicals, I tend to use the aluminum wire. Honestly, you can use whatever wire you want, really. But my reason why I'm using the aluminum is because copper wire, A, it's more expensive. And B, if I've got something like a pine or a juniper or whatever, that wire is going to sit on that tree for probably 3 times as long as it will for a tropical. So since the tropicals grow faster, it sets quicker, and the wire is on and consequently off quicker, then personally, I like to use something it's not gonna cost as much because it's not gonna sit on there as long. And by the, sometimes if I'm doing something in the, in the springtime, by the end of summer or early fall, I'm gonna be taking that wire off. Where the same wire might be sitting 3 years or more on a pine or a juniper or something like that. So I'm gonna just, digress a little bit and hit a couple of other things real quick. Thank you. Yeah, eventually we can. It might be easier on the camera and stuff like that. But also real quick too, since we're talking tropicals and things like that, I was also going to talk a real quick about some of the other stuff that I brought in before I get working on the big tree and stuff like that here. So to kind of introduce you to what I brought, including what's on the table and what's over there and stuff like that too. These are all tropical. Now, when I'm talking about tropical bonsai and stuff like that, shaping them, wiring them, as far as styling them, I'm probably doing most of them more similarly to how we would do a deciduous tree, like a maple or an elm or something like that. They lend themselves a little bit more to the deciduous style. And whenever I'm doing bonsai, my philosophy is, it isn't art, and it's you working with the tree. So there's a gazillion ways you can bend, shape, and do whatever. But when I'm thinking about a tree, and if you're going by kind of the Japanese standard of trying to make a tree, no matter what scale it is, look like a great big old tree, Well, I'm not trying to make a ficus tree or a jade look like a pine or a juniper. Okay, I'm going to shape them the way that junipers grow, not like junipers grow, but how a jade grows if it's a jade, how a ficus grows, and use those qualities, to try to make my, the best ficus that I'm trying to be. And I'm not going to try to pin it and shape it into something that like I said, like juniper or something. That's what I save my junipers and my pines for. Because I like working with that material too, and I do work with that material also. But, my pines look like pines and my ficuses look like ficuses because that's how it's supposed to be. So a few of the really common tropicals, and that's why I brought them here, are things, for example, like your ficus trees. So this is a ficus that is probably, I think I started it. It's about 22, I believe, or something like that. But ficuses, they'll get the really big, thick trunks. They'll throw aerial roots down, which is something that's, that growing in a banyan style is a characteristic that you're definitely not going to find in the conifers, and you don't find it in many other trees with the exception of usually ficus. And there's a few other banyan-type trees, like a Hawaiian umbrella tree or schiffelera will also make the banyans and stuff like that too, that I'm trying to use to incorporate into the design and stuff like that. Of course, over time, and if you keep them good and sunny, you can reduce the leaf size on them, pretty substantially, even when they're initially bigger. But frankly, leaves are about the last thing I worry about anyhow, because usually when I'm in the mind of building a tree, I'm trying to worry first about the trunk and the root system. Then I'm working on my branches, then my secondary branches, aerial roots sometimes, and truthfully, the leaves are the last thing I'm worried about. So sometimes when I'm doing things when I'm in the build phase of a tree, are things that are really, like how we always talk about wanting to get leaf reduction, like a really nice mature tree like this, I've got the leaves reduced down pretty well. But when I'm in the process of trying to get the trunk built up or trying to grow aerial roots on something like this, I'm actually doing things that are going to make my leaves stretch more than anything. Because number one, I'm usually putting in something larger. Number two, to keep your leaves real small, you need usually a fairly high amount of sun. But to make aerial roots, they do better in lower light or higher humidity. So a lot of times, instead of, when I've got a finished tree that I'm putting in a sunny location up on the top of my table, sometimes when I'm trying to build, my aerial roots, I'm actually taking my tree and I'm throwing it on the bench underneath my thing, and I'm crowding it with other trees because that's what makes them want to throw more aerial roots. Now, once those little aerial roots start hitting and thickening to where they're going to take, and they stay put, and truthfully, I can even wire them and move them where I want them or whatever, but when I get my basic form on my aerial roots the way I want them, then I can take the tree up, because sometimes my tree might be all lanky, my leaves might be stretched out this big, but I can defoliate it and bring it all back in tight after. But if I try to do that at the same time I'm trying to build those aerial roots, I'm never going to get my aerial roots. Now right here, this big guy that I'm going to be working on here in a little bit, this is a pretty fun tree. This is Jaboticaba. And really one of the things that I'm trying to bring, and I will talk about some of those here a bit too, because I admit, a lot of times things like which I am going to talk about a bit, like your ficus trees and your jade trees are great trees for bonsai, but they're also trees that are probably kind of common that maybe you guys have seen before or whatever. It doesn't make them bad. They're common and they get used a lot because they work good. But at the same time, I tried to, for this workshop or whatever, I'm trying to bring some things that I would consider a little more uncommon. Something a little fun, maybe something you hadn't seen before. Because most people who are starting out, sure, they like to get something that's, or to have some sort of solid, established, tree or whatever. But, I always like trying something new, and having something new and fun and not something that everybody else has. So some of the other trees that I brought along are some things that are, maybe a little less common. So, that hopefully, can make some fun stuff. Because especially when you guys take trees to show or whatever, it gets kind of, to me anyway, who sets up a fair amount of shows or whatever, or even a national level show, although you're seeing your pines and you're seeing your junipers and your maples, you don't want to show that pine, 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 juniper, 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 maple, maple, maple. You want to mix it up, and they really like seeing a diverse species and stuff like that. So it is kind of fun to have some nice tropicals, but also some diverse species and stuff like that. Which is the other reason why I decided to choose this guy right here for today's workshop. It's a Jaboticaba. So one that isn't super common, but a tree that I consider really kind of a fun tree. And I'm saying fun because it's always doing something. I mean, it does a lot of things that other trees don't. One thing that I really like about it, if you guys can see the bark on this, it has this really nice, colorful, peeling, flaking bark. So it's always changing. So I like, I do like the fun peeling bark and stuff like that. The leaves and the growth on it, it's a tree that does grow back good on old dead wood, or not dead wood, but the main trunk line and stuff like that. Hardwood, it's not going to just grow at your tips. If you cut it back hard, you are going to get good back budding off of this. It's also colorful because the leaves, when they're new, they kind of start out as sort of a rusty red color. Then they kind of go to a light green, then a dark green, but you get a little bit of that mix of color on the tree. It is a tree that will fruit and flower sometimes, but it's weird, in the point to where it's like this is actually kind of ficus that will make figs, and there's a couple here and there on it, but you'll see these little kind of green pea-sized figs, here and there on this tree or whatever, but they kind of tend to be more on the outside. And a lot of trees, the flowers and the fruit tend to be more out on the tips. On the Jaboticaba, the fruit and the flowers actually hang on the main trunk line, which is just kind of different. So when you get the flowers and stuff, they are going to be closer along the trunk line, and then when it makes the fruit, they kind of look like blueberries, frankly, but they kind of hang close to the trunk line, so it's just something a little bit different. Jades, like I said, let's talk about the jade real quick. I mean, because it is a good solid tree. So if you've never really tried bonsai, before, or for people who are starting out with wanting to do something indoors, probably in all truth, the two easiest ones probably are the ficuses and the jades. Jades like to be in a sunnier location. Honestly, in the summertime, I do have everything outside. And another reason why I started with tropicals, or really like tropicals too, because when I started doing bonsai a gazillion years ago, it's when I just got out of college. I didn't have a house. I had an apartment, which basically means I didn't have a yard. I didn't have a place where I could properly winter trees. But I did have a deck that I could put my trees outside on my deck during the summer, and then when it got cold, I could bring them in and put them by my kitchen window or whatever. So for some people that don't necessarily have an opportunity or a yard where they can winter things or whatever, or a garage, because of course I didn't have a garage in an apartment either, being able to do the tropical trees just worked better for me, being able to have them out on my deck for the summer and then just bring them in and treat them like a house plant.
Can you talk about the other side of that coin? Like, what's your fall like when it starts dipping below 45 or 50 degrees?
Yeah, I mean, as far as, Indianapolis's weather probably isn't much different from here, and about the only other place I've ever lived is in Missouri, so it's all been Midwest kind of stuff for me. I kind of go by normally keeping them in your tree, putting them outside around Mother's Day, bringing them in around Labor Day. So, but yeah, keep them above 50 ideally. And the truth is most of them can probably drop down to 45-ish before they really start stressing out. But I like to say 50 because it just gives you about a 5-degree cushion. Because, I mean, I know in Indianapolis, the weatherman's right 100% of the time, but I don't know if it's, if he or she is here. So sometimes when they say it's going to get down to 50, it might actually drop lower. So that's why I like to give myself a cushion.
And I just wondered how many trees you have that you have to do that with now if you are partial to tropicals.
Okay, well, I have a greenhouse now, and it also, this is now a full, I mean, this used to be just a side hobby for me. This is a full-time gig for me now. So having the greenhouse, I mean, it's like I have a few hundred trees. I mean, I have a personal collection of probably right around 75 of trees that are Scott's trees. Yeah. And then Eagle Creek Bonsai has its few hundred trees on top of that. So where I have trees, like when it gets cold or whatever, the majority of them do go into the greenhouse. But I do have some trees like that pretty much always go in, and I have them in my picture windows. You know, I actually even propagate and start things down in my basement under grow lights. So there's a lot of different options you can do. So, I mean, grow lights, if you have enough light, it works. Of course, I do like being outside for the summer if you can do them, but there are certainly some species that can be fine, you know, in the house too. Although, personally, I mean, all my plants do go outside for the summer. But if you can adapt them to darn near anything, if if you're just paying attention to the plant's needs, you can adapt them. Yeah, because like I was talking about, like probably two of the other individuals that are probably, I'd say, you know, that have made the greatest impression on me, the guys that I've worked with or whatever, is like Ed Trout down in Florida and Jerry Meislick up in Montana. You know, I've worked with both of these guys, and they both have fantastic ficuses and are really nice guys and know everything there is to know about all of this kind of stuff. But, you know, somebody like Ed, I mean, he's down, you know, South Florida. So for him, you know, his winter lasts about half a day every year, and his trees never go inside, you know, except for just a rare extreme, you know, every few years maybe he has to pull some in. You know, then you've got somebody like Jerry who lives up on a mountain slope, you know, in Montana, and his trees never go outside because it's never warm enough. They use completely different kind of soils, because my other thing is too, it's like when it comes to soils, you know, I always, you know, use what the local people are using, because really talking about bonsai soil, especially on the internet, is about like politics, you know, and stuff like that. You know, it's a quicker way to get into a fight than anything. So, you know, and to an extent, everybody's right, because, you know, even like I said, when I'm talking about the two guys, they're using completely different kind of soils. And here in the Midwest, I'm using a soil different than those guys. But I'm using what works best in my conditions. Here, I mean, I would say, okay, your conditions probably aren't much different than mine, but, you know, use what works here, because that's what everybody at bonsai is doing, is we're using what's working, we're adapting our environment best we can to make the trees happy, whether it's inside, outside, or somewhere in between or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, you can get them to adapt to just about anything if you're, you know, paying attention and you know what your trees want, basically. So, but for the most part, I mean, they need light, heat, fertilizer, water, you know, so it's just making sure they're getting enough of all of those no matter where your location is. I'm going to talk real quick about some of the stuff that we're going to be doing, you know, this weekend, and then I'll come back over here and start working on this tree. So to kind of give you an idea of what we are, I mean, these are about the size of trees that we're going to be using. You do have the option if you want to, I mean, because we could either just wire them, work on them, trim them or whatever, that's fine. With the tropicals, we can pot them right now too. So we can do all that stuff at once if we want to. So if you want to get a pot also, I mean, I will have pots available. I'll have trees available. If you want to pot it up and do it, we'll do the whole thing. If you only want to just work on trimming and pruning it, that's fine too. But we can, if you choose to, you know, do the potting, wiring, pruning, and everything. So some of the stuff that I'm bringing or whatever, you know, I am going to bring some good old Ficus microcarpa right here, which, I mean, these trees, you know, they're the ones that can make aerial roots. You know, they will make probably bigger trunks in less time than anything else. Branches are super flexible. You can be really mean to these things. You know, a lot of times I'll have a tendency of defoliating them, potting them and wiring them all at once, and then letting the leaves come back and everything. So you can, you know, aggressively defoliate these or whatever. Because I know sometimes, you know, like when I'm doing some of these workshops or whatever, especially with ficus, there's a guy you know, that's a little OCD in my club, so I torture him that, like, I'll defoliate a tree, but I'll leave like just one leaf on there, you know, because it bugs him more that I leave a leaf than if I just cut everything off. So that's my fun part of torturing him. Other trees that I think are kind of fun. This right here that I'll be bringing some of these is a Barbados cherry tree. Now there are a couple of different kinds of Barbados cherry trees. There's a dwarf Barbados and there's a standard. These are the standards, where the leaf's a little bit larger, a little more oval. There are flowers on these things. You know, the other thing that I like about tropicals, like a lot of cherries that grow here, I mean, you get your flowers, you get your cherries, but one season, that's it. For a lot of the tropical trees that flower, they'll do it several times a year. So you get more flowers, more fruit, and all that kind of stuff. So this is actually a tree. If you look close, I mean, it is starting to open up some little blooms on it. This is one I really like having outside for the summertime because the standard Barbados cherry will make a regular sized cherry that's it's an actual edible cherry. So the only thing that's a little bit different than the cherries that would grow around here or something like that is, you know how here we have kind of like one central pit. These will have about 3 smaller seeds that probably in total are about the same size of the pit, but you get a few little seeds in here versus one. And when you eat them or whatever, they have a slightly tangy or tart kind of a citrusy taste to them, but they're perfectly edible and cool or whatever. Also, you spit out the seeds. It's live seed, so you can plant them and make more Barbados cherry trees, which is always kind of fun. Like I said, so they're definitely not poisonous or anything like that. You do get repeated, growth out of them. Like you get a few things of cherries every year. You should put them outside for the summertime because although if you leave them in all the time, you'll get your flowers. They do need a pollinator, and personally, I would rather let the trees, put them outside and let the bees and butterflies get to them outside than bring the bees and the butterflies into the house to pollinate my trees. Yeah, one other kind of crazy side note, I had one of these once upon a time at a show, and I was mentioning to a lady, she was looking at them and it had cherries on it and stuff like that, and I was like, the cherries on these are actually edible. And she was like, really? She literally picked the cherry off and ate it in front of me. So, yeah, which was pretty, it's like, okay, never seen that before, but because just I was mentioning the fact that they were edible cherries, that wasn't really an invitation, but some people. Yep. All right, this little guy right here, this is a parrot's beak. Parrot's beak, super fast growing trees, get really nice trunks, nice, nice root system, do a lot of fun things, fast growing. They do like getting watered a lot because something has a really heavy canopy and it grows fast. It does suck up a lot of water. It is a tree that when I have them outside, normally it's a place where they like to be in, say, more morning sun and afternoon shade because they don't really, if they bake, they will wilt easy because, like I said, heavy canopy just needs lots of water. This fun little guy right here, I don't know if any of you guys have heard of the Vietnamese bluebells or not, but this is a Vietnamese bluebell. They will make a little purple flower on them that, I had heard before when I first got them that people always like the flowers smell like grape soda. And so like when the first time a flower took a whiff and it's like, okay, they really do smell like grape soda. They do make some super long thorns, but you can remove the thorns. So most of the time, even though this one has got some super crazy long thorns, normally when I shape them, wire them, prune them, I cut the thorns off. We got our jades. Now I know, I think I saw on your calendar, you do have some jade workshop coming up near the end of the year, so I don't know if you want to do a jade or not. Jades are super solid trees though for bonsai, very forgiving. They like being in the sun, but they can also dry out more than some trees can. So if you're somebody that's not real thorough about watering, this is a tree for you as long as you got enough sun for it. Summertime, like I said, I do like having them out in full sun. Wintertime, I do put them in like either a west or a south window, but they will do okay indoors because they can handle more arid conditions. And honestly, I've grown them under grow lights before too, but normally I have to have my grow lights on for about 16 hours a day. So it's, and I'm using just fluorescent lights, with the daylight spectrum maybe this far above my trees. But they do well, you can grow them just about any way you want as far as light goes.
When you bring those in or outside for the summer,
Yes.
do you get sunburn early on?
Not usually. Now sometimes with like a larger leaf ficus, sometimes I can get sunburn on it. But a lot of times too, when I'm getting ready to bring them out, it's when I'll just defoliate them and then throw them into the sun. So when the new leaves come back, they'll be smaller and the internodes from space to space will be a lot tighter. So I don't usually get sunburned because I just cut them all off before they get sunburned. So.
With jade too?
No, I've never had a jade get sunburned on me. Yeah, I mean, I've never seen a jade sunburn. It's one of the few species, like I said, I mean, maybe even, I've just never seen it, but. got some good old Brazilian rain trees. Brazilian rain tree is a really fun tree. You know, as they get older, they kind of flute out and flex and twist. They will get a nice peely bark on them and stuff like that. They're all around gorgeous tree. They do have thorns, got to be a little bit careful from. You can remove them if you want to, although honestly, I've got a super big one. I don't really remove the thorns on them, you know, but you can if you choose to. This right here is a dwarf black olive. This is a South American olive. These aren't the same as the European ones. This is a variety Buceta spinosa. They have a similar leaf shape to the standard, you know, black olives or whatever. But where these are kind of different is they will flower. You'll get little yellow flowers on them. But instead of making the olives that you would, you know, make olive oil out of or eat on your pizza or whatever, they make little star-shaped sort of seed pods and everything. Ordinarily, they only like getting repotted when it's like stupid hot outside. So the guy that taught me bonsai would always want to repot these just right around the 4th of July. But you know what? I think right now probably qualifies as stupid hot. So, you know, I would feel comfortable potting these now, honestly. Although it's not blooming right now, this is a lavender starflower. You know, scientific name Gruria capra. Common name lavender starflower because it makes lavender star-shaped flowers that are probably about the size of quarter to 50-cent pieces. When they flower, they're gorgeous. You know, I mean, you can do them formal upright or informal upright, but it's also really popular. A lot of people like doing them as cascades or semi-cascades as well. So you see a lot of them in semi-cascade form. They're a thirsty tree, though. When they are blooming, they do like to get watered a lot. So that's one that if you choose to do it, great tree, but be ready to water and water and water. So on a day like today, you know, in the 90s, it's like, yeah, I'm watering a lot of my outdoor things twice a day. You know, and if this were blooming, if I had it in a really sunny spot, usually this is another one I like to put more in a morning sun, afternoon shade. But otherwise, you know, I mean, you're going to be watering it constantly. Finally, I'll be bringing out some of these here. This is a water jasmine. The jasmines are awesome because, I mean, they do bloom fairly frequently, you know, and jasmine is super sweet. So when they're blooming, especially if you have them in an enclosed area, you know, it's very, I mean, the blooms are very noticeable because they're pretty blooms, but also that really sweet jasmine smell. You know, it really sticks out. Because I know like a season or so ago, you know, I'm also, besides, you know, being the president of the Bonsai Club in Indianapolis, I'm also a member of the Fort Wayne Bonsai Club. And they have a show a couple times a year, of which then they always have it where people are like voting for their favorite tree or whatever. You know, and one time I had my water jasmine, because I've got a really big, nice older one. It was flowering. So, you know, I bring this thing in and I put it up, you know, and their show is on a, you know, stand roughly this or whatever, but I'm putting it on a tall stand to put it like right up at nose level, you know, and it's one of those for people's choice. I just creamed everybody between the, you know, because I was like, it wasn't even fair, you know, with the blooms and sticking it up there right where everybody can smell it. So anyhow, that's kind of an idea of some of the stuff that I'll bring, you know, but I'll bring a few of everything.
And if people want to bring their own tree to work on, if they have a tropical they want to work on, is that acceptable?
Yeah, I'll let you. You know, I mean, I'm bringing a lot of stuff out there, you know, some really good new stuff, but yeah. Yeah, but
If somebody's in that position.
yeah, I mean, we got time, we can work on them. That's not a problem. So, yep, we can do it. All right, so now I guess we're going to go ahead and we'll get what we're working on to our big guy here. Our Jaboticaba. So I'm going to start grabbing out some of my tools and things like that. Yeah, actually, yeah, Gaboticaba, Jaboticaba, which is fun to say too. See, so that's also a plus. So yeah, they look fun and it's got a fun name. So basically, this is one we're just going to work on today, just doing, you know, pruning, wiring, and all that kind of stuff on it or whatever. But like I said, so when I picked out this tree, because, it's like anytime I'm trying to do a workshop tree, especially something somebody's going to raffle off, I want it to be something kind of nice, something kind of fun, something kind of different. And actually, maybe even getting started with this, actually I might even start at the table where it's a little bit lower to work on some top stuff here real quick. Because unfortunately, I have short parents. So all right. So when we're looking at this tree, I picked it out. One of the reasons why I like it, I've got a lot of branches going in a lot of different directions. So that is a lot of plus because it gives me lots of options. So of course, the first thing we're always trying to figure out, when we're working on a tree or whatever, is what's the front. Because a tree like this, there actually are some, a number of options. So when I'm trying to think about a finished tree or whatever, or when I'm just doing a bonsai in general, I'm kind of trying to break it down as far as, you want your tree to look natural. You want it to look proportional. You want to try to avoid visual distractions. And when I'm talking about visual distractions, would be if I had a branch, let's say, for example, let's just take this branch, and it's cutting across my main trunk line. I'm going to want to eliminate or hide things that are distractions. No tree is perfect. Every tree has got something that we want to improve on it. That's why we do bonsai, and that's why it's an art. Because, everything we can do. So I'm trying to, we can try to do, and over time, we're going to try to make this tree better and better and better. So I'm going to really try to work on, more than anything, get a good skeleton framework that whoever is the next person who owns this tree is going to be able to, to build on it, and over time, make this a really nice tree. So like I said, the pluses on the tree, like I said, we've got the nice peely bark. But when I'm looking, at there, and one person might say, well, the bark looks prettier on this side versus that side. That's not something that I'm going to use to determine what's going to be my front as far as the bark, because honestly, the bark is always peeling and always changing. So just because this side might look prettier right now because it's peeling doesn't mean that in 3 months, this side might not look, because it's always going to change. So I'm really kind of trying to look at things that I can't change and how I'm going to influence it. And what I'm saying, when I'm looking around, I'm looking at branches, but I'm also looking at my tree from the bottom. This is for any kind of tree. Kind of start at the bottom and work my way up. So I do want to try to find a nice trunk line, but also I'm trying to find where the roots look pretty decent too. Because over time, if I've got bad looking roots or whatever, and it gets bigger, then they're just going to get uglier, frankly. And then, and now you can always work and do some changes on roots. You can do some things like, thread grafting in roots in other places if you really have to. But at the same time, don't have time to do that today and stuff like that. And that'd be something we want to do, down the road. So I'm going to try to find, an angle where I do like the root system. I'm also looking at this tree, and frankly, this tree is, in my opinion, just too tall. So really, when I'm looking at stuff to get rid of, apex really needs to be right around in here. So a lot of this stuff right here is going to go away. I'm going to be looking for some crossing branches sticking out where I don't like them, that kind of stuff, and I'm going to be getting rid of that. And like I said, I'm going to find my front. So sometimes when I'm working on some of this stuff, I'm going to try to just get rid of what I know I'm not going to use, just so that way it's just not in my way, frankly. And the nice thing is, too, that this tree, even if I top this out some, it does grow back really well on the, so it will back bud on me and everything. It's not like, another thing that I do admit I kind of like when I'm doing the tropicals versus, okay.
We can really lower this.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, this sounds really bad of me and not being prepared. It's a concave cutter.
Concave.
Or did I leave one? Oh, okay, there I go. Because I thought, oh my gosh, all right. Because I freaked myself out because it's like, okay, just before I got here, I was working on a client's tree and stuff like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, did I just leave my concave cutter back at that other tree I finished up because I was just using it? Okay, losing it. No, I should have had everything. I just went looking in there, forgot that I set them out. All right, so I've got my good branches here that I like, or my good trunk. But some things that I don't like, this right here would be lower than I would want to use. I like the movement in here. Don't know that I like the trunk quite as much over here. There is some, that's a little better than I thought. Okay, well, anyhow, when we're working on bonsai, generally speaking, what you're trying to do is try to create the illusion of age. Like I said, no matter how big or how old a tree is, you're trying to make it look like an older tree. Now, older trees, when we think about the deciduous trees versus the conifers and stuff like that, your conifer, if this is a conifer, your bend sloping down comes almost straight from the trunk, to where a lot of times with our deciduous trees and our tropicals, it kind of flows up and then out. So generally speaking, I'm trying to get a lot of stuff where I'm going up and then out with my weight, going down on the outside, but it's not going to be taking a sharp pull straight down like you would on a conifer, because this isn't a conifer. I do want to go ahead and try to show about the lower third of my trunk, just because the other thing that helps create the illusion of age is just being able to see that more mature trunk. I'm going to get rid of some branches. Like this is an example of a crossing branch over, crossing over my trunk line that I don't necessarily want. I'm also going to be looking for some areas where I maybe have too many branches coming out of one point.
Where is this tree from? What country?
I'm actually pretty sure this tree is from Brazil. I'm almost positive this is a tree that's native to Brazil. Like I said, right now just getting rid of stuff that I don't think I want and don't think I need. Okay, so I've got till 9 o'clock basically. I don't know how much cleanup time. Okay.
A little longer if you need it.
Okay. Yeah, so some of this stuff that I'm trimming back harder, like I said, I can trim it back because a lot of times if you trim back to where there's no growth on the tip of a pine tree or something like that, you're going to wind up with a dead branch. Where in the case of so many of the tropicals, we can cut back on these things pretty significantly and they are going to grow back. So you can be a little more aggressive on the pruning, knowing that we are going to get back budding on these. So right now I'm doing a little bit where I'm just kind of trying to trim things back into roughly the silhouette that I want it to be in before I start doing more advanced wiring onto it. And with the tropicals in the rate of growth, a lot of times I'm trying to wire a basic skeleton or framework on these things. But over time, I do like doing a lot of, basically directional pruning on these things once you kind of get it set. In the case of directional pruning, which you can do on so many things versus having to wire every single branch into place, basically when you cut these things back hard and start back budding, you're going to have pairs of leaves going in different directions. You usually have, like, say, 2 spread out this way, 2 spread out that way. Usually, anytime you cut back to a pair of leaves, it's going to fork on these from that point. And the leaves are going to go out. The new leaves are going to go out about the same way those last 2 leaves are. So if you have leaves going, say, this, forward and back, the new shoots are going to go this way. Or if I have them going out this way, they're going to go out that way. So we can do a lot of our pruning and shaping just by, or a lot of the shaping just by determining where we're going to prune, and prune to buds going in certain directions to get these things to shape up the way we want. The other fun thing about trimming some of these things and working on them and being able to be fairly rough on them. The guy that initially taught me how to do bonsai, his nickname with my club was the butcher of Montgomery County, because he is like would take some tree and he would just hack it down to nothing. And I think to an extent he did it for a little bit of shock value. But then you see that same tree a few months later on, they fill out extremely fast for a lot of the tropicals. So it's a lot of eliminating a lot of stuff to bring it all back in, because a lot of times with a lot of these trees that are bigger trees or something like that with more growth out on the tips, if they just let this go at a nursery, it's going to keep growing out on the tips, and it starts losing some of this interior growth. But when we cut it back hard and cut the tips back, then that interior growth starts backfilling again. So that's going to get us a more compact, more full tree. So, don't be afraid to trim on a lot of this stuff. So really, when I am taking a lot off of some of this and not leaving much growth, it's not because it's, not trying to kill the tree or anything like that. A lot of it is because I expect this tree to back bud and fill back in to fill those spaces up. Because I don't necessarily want my growth way out here. I do want to try to bring it in. Yes, sir.
Forgive me if you said this already, but I just looked this tree up, and by the way, you're correct, from Brazil. And it looks like this is the tree that grows with grapes right out in front.
Yes. Yeah, I did mention that before. It does. It will flower, and it is. You'll get the grapes, or they look kind of like grapes or blueberries almost. To me, they are a little more blueberry looking, but yes, they do it right on the trunk line. So it's kind of different compared to a lot of other trees that tend to grow stuff, more out on the ends, because most trees grow out more on the ends than they do on the inside.
So you would expect it to periodically grow those roots on even if it's potted tree.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have one this size in my collection right now, but I did have a big one that once upon a time actually Ed Trout and I did together and stuff, and it was about the same size as this one. And it was actually one that Ed had done as a workshop for my club probably 8-9 years ago. And it, like I said, it's about the same size as this one, and I was getting fruit on it regularly and stuff like that. And the only reason why I don't have it now is because I had a really good customer offer me my I don't want to sell it price, so it's his now. So I still get visitation rights, because every now and then he brings it back to me to trim it up and everything. So tree's still doing fine. It's just not mine anymore. Yeah, it'll flower before. Yeah, well, pretty much in the case of bonsai, although there's a lot we can do to influence the leaf size, we can't ever really change the size of the fruit or the flowers. So they're pretty much always going to be standard. But in the case of these, like I said, it's about the size of a blueberry on these things. And like I said, to me, it looks more like a blueberry than anything.
So is there a certain age when it starts to produce, or is it like a certain age,
Well, some of these things, especially when I get them like this, I don't know exactly how old they are. But what I'm saying is, ones that I've had, that are smaller ones like that, I've not had them produce fruit. Most of the time, when they get up to this size, they will. So, but exactly how old this is, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's one that I got it in Florida, so it's probably growing faster than it would be in Cincinnati or in Indianapolis, But yeah, because it was growing out in South Florida, so it's a pretty, I would guess this tree to probably be somewhere 10 plus years old, but I don't know exactly. But yeah, it's a fun tree, and I would totally expect this one to be blooming. Anybody want to see if they make a cutting? It might. Smaller ones will. If anybody wants any of this stuff, as far as I'm concerned, you can. I know a lot of times, I go to these club meetings and stuff like that, and I throw this stuff into the garbage can, and people are like, oh, it's rooting through the trash, bringing getting the cuttings, which is fine. Most of the time, the cuttings, actually, they do tend to root pretty easy on these.
Even the hardwood or just the, like...
No, I can get these to go on the hardwood. Now let's say, okay, a little side note here. Like if I was gonna start something like this, there's a good chance I can get it to start, but I'd take almost all the leaves off and leave maybe 4 or 5 leaves on this whole thing, because how a tree works basically, so I mean, you guys probably already obviously know this, but it obviously brings water into the roots. It transpires, it loses water through the leaves. So if I have no root system and a whole ton of leaves, this dude's going to dry out before it starts producing roots. But if I use a root growth hormone and stick it in the soil and reduce it down to maybe just 4 or 5 leaves, then the 4 or 5 leaves will be able to be enough to bring energy in to start making roots, because it basically the energy, it collects energy, sends it down to the roots. If it doesn't have roots, it'll start creating roots. But since it transpires and loses water, you basically need it to make the roots before it dries out. So by reducing the leaves down to just, like I said,
how easy are these to root?
Realistically, I probably bat 500 on these. Like ficuses, I'm probably at 90%. These and Brazilian rain trees, I probably bat about 50% on them. So make 2, you could probably get 1, or whatever. It's really kind of playing a numbers game. But I also admit too, when the number game gets too low, then that's when I'm usually letting somebody in South Florida do it, because they've got more space, and with me having limited greenhouse space, I don't necessarily have room for like 2/3 of my stuff to fail. I would rather let them mess with it or whatever. And some trees that are harder, like some like over there, say for example the Bacida spinosa, the dwarf black olives, they like it when it's really hot, and that's it. And I have never ever been able to get one of those to start from a cutting. And most of the ones that you get even from South Florida, they're doing air layering off of bigger trees in the ground. So the air layering is really successful. Your chances of getting one of those from a cutting is highly unlikely. All right. So some things too that I'm looking at, like I don't necessarily like, is I've got like say 2 branches stacked up right here on top of one another. I really don't need 2 of them here, and I think actually I'm going to let go of this lower one here. Now, normally when I'm wiring these, like I said, I do have a preference. Actually, that's a bigger wire than I want. We normally need wire that's about half the width of the branch we're trying to bend. And some of these too, I mean, are pretty flexible here. Obviously, you get into something like this. Although I've been able to twist and bend pines that are this big, you're not going to be able to get this thing to bend, you know. So, you know, find a trunk line that you're happy with, because you're going to be pretty much stuck with it at this point on this one here. Now, when I'm working on foliage pads and stuff like that, and ordinarily when I'm wiring, like I said, I'm starting at the bottom, working my way up. And I'll actually try to do this. We'll move it over here so you guys can see better. I'll try to work from behind it so I'm not blocking it out the whole time. But also one of the things that, you know, makes a tree look realistic as a tree, you're always trying to create a sense of depth. So ordinarily when I'm trying to shape a tree or whatever, one of my best explanations on people is try to make your tree look like it's trying to reach out and hug you, okay? And what I'm saying, your two lower branches, your number 1 and number 2 branch, should be coming slightly towards you, along with your apex should be falling towards you, which is the other reason why I kind of like this angle, because my apex is already going slightly towards you, because your apex is also going to look more appealing. Your tree's going to look more appealing when you have the apex coming towards you versus falling away from you. Same thing when you have your lower branches coming towards you, like it's reaching out to give you a hug, you know, as opposed to going, running away from you. That's not what we want from our trees. Now this branch here, I'm shaky on this branch. Because that's the thing, it's not a bad place for a number 3. Your number 3 branch should always be going towards the back, and that's pretty much on just about any type of tree, because when we're trying to create, trying to make this look like a nice, mature tree, trees aren't flat like cookie cutters, you know, they have depth to them. So, you know, ideally you should have your number 1 or your number 2 coming slightly towards you. Then you want something, your number 3 branch, basically going towards the back. So, and like I said, in this branch here, I'm having a little bit of hard time wrapping my brain around it, and I'll get into it when I get up to it.
Is it the thickness compared to the 2 lower branches?
That's one of the main things. It is the thickness compared to the 2 lower branches, because it is thicker, and I admit that's kind of a negative that I don't like. But and sometimes, like I said, there are some things that I consider, you know, like I said, the visual distractions. You've got your choice of whether you want to remove it or hide it. If it were off to the side, I would definitely be removing it. The thing is, though, since it's more towards the back, and as these fill in, it's giving me my sense of depth. And although I really think this is bigger than I want it to be, I'm probably going to keep it in back, because if this is my front, it's kind of going to be hidden. So it's going to give me my depth, but at the same time, it's not going to look out of proportion as much, you know, in the long run. Now, the reason why I'm doing this, where I'm using multiples or like this, because sometimes, you know, with the wire that you need a wire that's about half the width of the branch you're trying to bend, and a single wire like this isn't going to necessarily, you know, move a branch like this, but 3 of them together are going to. But at the same time, too, really what my plan is I'm going to take these and basically spread them out. So a lot of times when I'm wiring something like this, I like to grab up to, usually about 4 is the max, but several of them, and then run each of them down a different branch. So I'm going to try to work on making a fairly flat foliage pad and fan it out, because in that way, when it grows in, it's going to look, you know, going to give it that nice full. Whenever I'm working on foliage pads in general, or sometimes I call them foliage clouds, because I do think of it a lot like a cloud. That so most of our trees, you're going to want to have them flat. You don't want to have growth coming out of the bottom on them, so it's flat on the bottom and fluffy on the top. Think of it like a cloud. So when we're making the foliage pads, you make your pads like how you would imagine a cloud to be, flat on the bottom, fluffy on the top.
So Scott, you said this will backbud pretty readily.
Yes.
Will it go all the way back into the main trunk, or,
It'll probably fill into at least back into here.
but not on the?
Now you will get shoots coming out of the trunk every now and then and stuff like that. Most of them I'm going to probably wind up removing them, so you will get new growth on the trunk, but most of that I'm not going to use. I will maybe use up into here, but I want this to be fairly exposed anyhow. So most stuff, if it starts popping back out here again, I'm probably would be inclined to remove it.
But if down the road someone might want to make that a shorter tree and they chopped it back, they could expect some backbudding.
Yeah.
To get your branches on the main trunk.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, it is one that you can definitely get. Because it will sometimes throw new shoots just right along the main trunk. So if you decided a new shoot popped here and you wanted to make that a new apex and drop another foot out of it, you could. Whereas generally speaking, when we wire, we try to wire roughly at a 45-degree angle. Tends to be about the best hold for them. Usually like to try to finish on an upswing, and then I'll cut off the excess. So So when I'm talking about like removing downward branches, like if you can see like this one here that's coming down more, that's one I would get rid of that. Might come back and wire those again a little tighter if we'll see how much time I've got. See, sometimes a bad thing about wiring a tree too, when I'm at the house and wiring, it's something you can, it's sort of quiet and you're working fast or whatever. When I'm doing that for a presentation, I'm trying to talk my way through it or whatever, because otherwise, watching somebody wire a tree, I think it's really boring. Once again, I'm going to take this one, I'm going to use multiple wires and then wire them out. So the aluminum wire that I'm using right now, I mean, this is, this is 2mm wire, which for me is probably one of the sizes I like to use the most often. Whoops. The soils that I like using the most, that I put in for most of my tropicals, I'm usually using a combination of lava rock, composted pine bark mulch, and turfus is what I use for most of my tropicals. It varies a little bit as far as if I'm doing other, like in the case of tropicals, once again, here we are getting into, got me talking about soil, so okay, I'm going to have everybody sending me hate mail or whatever. But I don't tend to use something like akadama or anything in a tropical because they're not growing in it naturally, and it's something that they usually, most of the tropicals, majority of them are rainforest plants, so they're used to growing in soil that's a little more rich anyhow, to where, I know once again, like we're talking Ed Trout, even down in South Florida, where most of the time, I hear, we'd be like, no, we wouldn't do that. But it's like he'll put his trees like half, he uses like half Miracle-Gro potting soil in his, which is really high organic and stuff like that. And normally, I'm telling people, well, we need something that's a little lower organic, that doesn't break down as fast, so because we don't want to root rot the thing out before we have to repot it. But in his case, it's like, well, it's growing so fast, he's got to repot the thing every year anyhow. So basically, the soil doesn't get spent in the amount of time that it would in some other locations. But like I said, in my case, I like using like I said, it's like there's this place where I can get a really good but fairly fine composted pine bark mulch, and that's about a third of my component right there. And like I said, lava rock and turfus. Where actually Jerry Meislich growing his stuff indoors is kind of interesting because his growing mix is almost all lava rock, and he basically has it. His growing situation is almost hydroponic, because he's giving them like a slow drip constantly of a liquid, food or whatever. And in his condition, even though these guys, like I said, grow stuff completely differently, they both have trees that look absolutely fantastic because they're, pretty well, growing what does best in their situation, fertilizing on these things, I admit I do tend to be somebody that's pretty much a heavy fertilizer on tropical trees. And it's mainly because, out of observation on these things. Like if I go down to Florida and you go see like how some of these guys are growing these things, they're getting pretty fast results, but also half the bottom of this thing would just be covered with like slow release pellets. I mean, like a tree this size, they'd probably throw half a cup of slow release pellets on the top of it. So I mean, they feed the heck out of these things to get them to grow. So, and obviously it seems to work pretty well for them down there. So, in some trees that does work better more than others, especially super feeding the tropicals, or like ficus trees in particular, because the negative about overfeeding them or super feeding them is on some trees, they're not gonna use that. So pretty much any excess fertilizer is just going to wind up going down the drain. So you're literally just paying for something that's going to get washed out. But there are a lot of tropicals, particularly ficus, that kind of takes to excess fertilizer the way my stomach or my gut takes to excess jelly donuts. And I'm saying, it's like, okay, unfortunately, all the extra calories aren't going to just pass out of you. They're going to be packing them on. For a lot of the ficus trees, something more similar to these guys here, one of the ways that get the really big bases on those is to really feed the heck out of them, because it does cause the base to swell, because they'll store that up. So they have a habit of storing stuff up versus letting it flow out. So by feeding them really hard, it does make the trunks get thicker. So particularly things like your narrow leaf ficus, Ficus microcarpa. You can get a really chunky tree in less time if you feed them really hard. But that doesn't apply to, like a pine tree. You don't want to get your needles too long. Or, there's a lot of other trees that, you wouldn't want to super feed. A lot of tropicals that are growing in tropical regions tend to take it up and grow faster. But also, when we do bonsai and how we look at feeding them, shaping them, or whatever, you got to think of why a tree does what it does. And what I'm saying by, trying to understand why a tree does what it does, you've got a tree, let's say like a ponderosa pine, that are slow growing, don't have very fertile soil. They're spending most of their existence, clinging to alongside of the mountain where they've got high winds. They've got rain, very little rain in the summertime. You've got, they're in really bad conditions, so they grow super slow, but they're made to really hunker down in those situations to where they're used to, and their whole mode of, what makes them tick is the fact that they're fighting the elements. Now, in the case of many of the tropicals, a rainforest tree, say for example, is not fighting the elements. It's in very fertile soil. It's getting plenty of rain. So it's really in a fantastic condition. What this tree isn't fighting the elements, it's fighting its next door neighbor for space. Okay, so these trees tend to try to grow as fast and stretch as fast as they can, and that's why a lot of them also like to try to go horizontal when they can, because they're basically trying to build a bigger footprint. Another good thing about it, that is some of the reasons too why these can handle sometimes a little bit lesser sun, because they adapt more so than like a tree clinging on the side of a mountain. It's at a higher altitude, air's thinner, it's getting more direct sun. This is getting crowded by a lot of other trees trying to gain its space, but at the same time it's trying to survive, and it needs to be able to survive being under the canopy of another tree until it can spread out. So they kind of try to shoot up and out fast, but they can handle a little lower light versus, like I said, a pine might be completely different. So when we fertilize something that's used to being in fertile soil and is used to growing quick, like I said, they tend to be tougher. You tend to get a little bit more out of them in less time, which is one of the reasons why I like them, because it just means I don't have to wait as long from when I'm potting to when I'm wiring or when I'm doing or whatever. I'm really getting more growth packed into every season, so I can be less patient. Where, like I said, although I do enjoy doing my pines and junipers and stuff like that, they are not on the same, I don't feed them as hard or as often or anything like that. It's just completely, different. But, it's kind of like, I don't know, cooking in the microwave versus cooking in the oven or something like that. These are the ones that you pop into the microwave some, so you get your results in less time. Generally, no. Cut paste is one of those things that, I don't know, it almost seems like everybody was using cut paste and then a lot fewer people use cut paste anymore. And it's even harder to find than it used to be. About the only time I use a cut paste on something, if I'm taking something off, maybe that's this big around, maybe then I'll consider using cut paste if it's a really, really large wound. But most of these things heal and roll into it fast enough that, and for a ficus, pretty much it's gonna, it's got its latex is gonna, bleed into and fill up anything anyhow. So, yeah, for most of my things, generally speaking, I do not use cut paste. Cut paste, there's a couple of different brands of it, and some liquid one. There's like it's basically a paste where if you make a large enough wound, there's always a chance that something can get in there and like a bug or something. Or some people are of the opinion that it helps it heal a little bit better. So, and there's a couple of different kinds. There's some that's almost like a putty type, you know, that you would put in, and there's ones that are made for conifers, and ones that are made more for deciduous type of trees. Like I said, it's not, to me, there's not near as much use or need for the tropicals, for the cut paste, you know, or sometimes my version of cut paste, if I've done something to where actually I've like really bent a branch and have cracked something, I've just used a drop of Elmer's wood glue and just pushed it in there, and then maybe, you know, splint it up a little bit. So more often than not, for something like this, if I did damage something, I wouldn't use a cut paste. I'd use something just like a wood glue, seriously. But there are some. There's another one that there was a popular cut paste. It's called Top Gen M. Comes in a tube. It's more of a liquid, almost like a glue, but it looks like Thousand Island dressing. It's like a bright orange stuff or whatever. And you know, that for a while was kind of a hot thing, but you just, like I said, I seldom use it for my stuff. Granted, sometimes too, like if I'm doing something like a juniper or whatever. I mean, sometimes, I mean, I'm purposely stripping wood off sometimes, but it's like, but it's something that I've ginned. I'm never using cut paste around anything that I've ginned or anything like that, even though I've seen some people try to seal around the outside. To me, it's, in my opinion, it's not necessary. Yeah, so, yeah, just don't really use it myself. Now, granted, you know, if you really want to use it, I don't necessarily think it's going to hurt your tree. But it seems like the people that are the ones that are most interested in that are the ones that are, you know, most interested in just selling you some cut paste. You know, it's something else to, yeah, you know, I mean, it's, and me, I'd rather spend my money on trees. You know, it's like I can justify spending money on trees. I can justify spending money on pots. There are some things that I feel less justified in spending money on personally. You know, to an extent, tools. You know, because I mean, it's like, okay, you know, bonsai tools, you know, in my opinion, are kind of like, I don't know if any of you guys are golfers or not or something like that, but I look at it, you know, like bonsai tools being a lot like golf clubs, you know, because I mean, I do golf, and I'm kind of a hack golfer that only gets out a few times a year. And the truth is, I could probably throw away half the clubs in my bag and I'd still be fine, because I have like my 4 or 5 go-tos, and those are the ones that I'm using almost all the time. And like everything else, you see people with these, you know, 30-piece tool sets. Odds are they're only using 4 or 5 tools out of their 30-piece tool set most of the time. But they look good, exactly. So yeah, so I'm not super, you know, I don't get crazy on my having too many tools. Get what you need. Don't get it if you don't need it, you know. Now, there are some times too that it's like, depending on the size of the tree and what I'm working on, it's like, yeah, sometimes I will use a saw. Sometimes I will use an electric saw on a really big tree. Sometimes I will use my Dremel and a grinder if I'm working on certain things. So sometimes some of the tools I'm using actually are power tools, but not all the time. All right, I'm getting to the point where I am looking at this branch here, and like I said, it's, you know, the minus side is, compared to a lot of the other branches, this is larger, and if I had it, if this were my front, I wouldn't like it because it is bigger than the rest of them, and I'd be more inclined to remove it. But when I'm working on it and I've got, this is the front, this branch, the biggest chunk of this branch is kind of being hid by the main trunk anyhow, so I'm gonna leave it allow it to fill in some here to give me this third dimension, to give me some back depth to it. But overall, from the front, it's not really the distraction that I want it to be. You know, same thing also from this angle. Depending on a certain angle, not only do I have this here, but I've got this, you know, almost two of them coming out here. But the truth is, I would have loved for this branch to be right here on the main trunk, but it's not. It's actually coming off of this back branch. But it's in the right position for it to be my branch right up here. So even though it's kind of starting off the back and this is the front, the fact that it's hidden from here and that it's going to wind up, even though it's not starting ideally where I'd want it, it's going to end where I want it, and you're never going to see it back here. So that's another thing that, you know, because of the angle that I've chosen, even though this one and this one aren't exactly what have been my number one places or number one size of branch, if I could magically make this tree put everything where I wanted, I've got enough to work with here that I can hide these things that would otherwise I'd consider kind of a negative. But since I can hide it to the back and to the side, it's going to be fine. And actually, kind of one of the pluses is that I'm going to actually use this to anchor this, which is going to be my side branch. So that way I won't really have to cross over my main trunk. Because truth be told, I don't like to cross over my main trunk any more times than I really absolutely have to. So if I can do it to the back or can go branch to branch at any possible time, I will do that.
Would you ever gin or slowly tropical?
Ginning on tropical is like sometimes, but it depends on what it is. You know, the reason why you don't see a lot of gins on a lot of tropicals because most of the time the wood is softer, and those gins are going to basically wind up breaking and rotting away fairly fast. So that's why you don't see a lot of gins, but never say never. There are exceptions to every rule. One of the best trees, if you wanted to do gin and you wanted a tropical, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with buttonwoods or not, but buttonwoods actually, the reason why they call them buttonwoods, you know, I mean, it is a tree that's a South Florida swamp tree. Mary Madison used to be one of the best at collecting those things when she was alive. And they're fantastic, and they're great to work with and stuff like that. And but the reason why buttonwood was called a buttonwood is because you literally used to use them to make buttons. It was that hard of a wood, despite the fact that it was a swamp type tree. So in the case of the buttonwoods, you can use them and gin them, and naturally, you know, if collected ones do have a lot of dead wood even naturally in them. But at the same time, you can grind them. You can use your lime sulfur and do a lot with them. So I do have some buttonwoods that I do have quite a bit of gin on them. Ficus, although ordinarily you know I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I have seen it done, and I actually have a ficus that does have some dead wood ginned into it. It's kind of like I said, it's the exception, not the rule, because you know, and I've been real careful about keeping it treated and stuff like that, because otherwise it could potentially rot off easier. You know, and actually I've seen a couple of other ficuses that actually do have gin on them, although like I said, it's not something you would do ordinarily. But in the case of the one that I have, it was a tree that it was growing initially in a really big bucket, but then it rooted into the floor of a greenhouse and had this great big piece that like basically lipped over and went down. Well, I pulled this up and I cut this tree initially into about 5 different pieces, and where it had this really big turn, I decided to go ahead and gin it. So I like basically took it and peeled strips, to give it, because there are sometimes we'll grind, but I don't know if you've ever seen it where you pinch and pull off pieces where you get strips, and follow that out, and it actually worked really well. Now I've got to really baby it, and I do have to keep it pretty well treated to make sure it doesn't, it doesn't rot off on me or anything. But, that's a project I did, I don't know, 12, 13 plus years, and it's still actually holding up really well.
How close is a buttonwood to a button bush? Are you familiar with button bush?
Not familiar at all with buttonbush, so I don't know.
Does the flower on the buttonwood, what is that? Does it flower?
A buttonwood will flower. It's not what I would consider a really showy flower. It kind of has a dandelion type look to it, if that makes any. It does have a really nice sweet smell to it. So that's a good thing about it. So it has a sweet smell, kind of a dandelion puff look to it. Not even a golf ball size. They're probably nickel size, really, as far as the puffs. You can almost smell them better than you can see them. If I've got some time, I'm sure I've got pictures of my buttonwoods I can show you and stuff like that. Buttonwoods can be sort of cantankerous trees, though. Because like the guy that initially taught me bonsai, honestly, he could never keep them alive. But figured out eventually the reason why he could never keep them alive is, although they're really tough, as far as what they can handle being in weather and stuff like that, one thing they cannot handle is they don't like oil sprays. So if you're trying to spray like a lot of us who tend to spray a lot of our trees, defensively, let's say, we'll use something like a neem oil or something like that. I'll have to take my buttonwoods and I'll move them out. I'll spray my stuff and then bring my buttonwoods back in. Now I have used successfully things like 7 spray on them or something like that. So, but something like a neem oil or a oil-based insecticide will kill those things quicker than anything. So you just have to not use it. But since in his case, like a neem oil was like his go-to anytime, and he just wasn't aware, and it's something I found out years later from talking to people in Florida, what not to do. Mike had just completely given up on them because, like I said, they just didn't, he couldn't keep them alive because he was always treating them with, an insecticide that they couldn't handle.
Do you use a Bear 3-in-1?
I do like using the Bear 3-in-1, and I will use the Bear 3-in-1. Now, the Bear 3-in-1, I like the granular type because there is like a liquid and a granular. I don't really like the liquid. The granular works great in my opinion, and that does work. They do well with that.
Malathion, yay or nay?
Never tried malathion on them.
I lost one over the winter, and I don't know what killed it. Kind of died on me near the end.
Yeah. Where'd you get your buttonwood?
I got it in 2019 from someone on Bonsai Auctions. I'd have to
Okay.
get the name. It was a really nice piece, though.
Yeah, they are nice trees, but like I said, that's the main thing. Wintertime, they're not necessarily big fans of being in the house for the wintertime. My greenhouse, they do pretty good, even though most of us with greenhouses, we still have a little bit of leaf loss. But in the spring, you defoliate them. Now most of the time when we're defoliating them, you don't, we actually cut and leave just a little bit of the leaf. Like if I were defoliating my buttonwood.
You see those 2 little nodes on the buttonwood
Yeah, that's how I would cut it, is like that. You just leave a little bit of it on the stem, and eventually those will dry up and drop off, and you will get back budding on those. They will back bud on the old wood too. So I mean, I like buttonwoods, but at the same time they're a little trickier than some other trees. So yeah, and most of it has to do with having to be careful with how you treat them for pests. But when it comes to, if it was something that you wanted to try to do deadwood or something like that on a tropical, it's by far the best. If you're doing deadwood on a tropical, getting a buttonwood, of which, yeah, I mean, I've got a couple that are already potted up that don't have a lot of deadwood on them right now, but have to, but you can certainly make some smaller ones. I've got some, like I said, some really good personal ones that like I said, when Mary Madison was alive, I used to go to her place to get those because she always had really just top shelf collected stuff. How are we doing on time? Okay, here comes a big cop-out, as long as it needs it. So ordinarily, I mean, it's really hard for me to gauge exactly how long it's going to need to do. I just usually have to keep an eye on my wiring. When the wire just starts barely cutting in on it, that's when I cut my wire off. I never try unwrapping it because you just always have a higher chance of breaking it or damaging your trunk or something like that. So yeah, so you always take the time to cut it off versus trying to unwrap it or whatever, so I don't reuse wire or anything. Okay, that's what I was gonna say. Okay, where'd that go? All right.
There's your cutting.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like I said, the X factor is gonna depend on. It's like, okay, if somebody brings this home and decides to repot it, that might initially slow it down a little bit. If you leave it in here and fertilize the heck out of it, you know what? It's probably gonna, fill back in faster. But how long it takes really is gonna just depend on, it's just how fast it's growing. But like I said, a lot of it is, fertilizing. Now, like I said, my trees, I do tend to fertilize pretty hard. As far as what I use for fertilizer, I hit it a few different ways and a few different types. Because once again, like relying on some of these guys that, who I consider for tropicals being really some of the contemporary masters of the tropical bonsai. You've got somebody like your Ed Trout, and honestly, what he's using in all his stuff, good old Miracle Grow. That's pretty much it. Jerry Meislich, of which I admit I probably like his school of thought a little bit more, just because it makes sense to me. And that is basically, think of like when we're eating food, it's good for us to have a good balanced diet. We're not going to want to eat the exact same thing all the time. Most of your fertilizers are going to have your basic, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. That's they're all going to have that, and usually pretty good as long as you're using them as directed. That's going to take care of most things. But sometimes there are different trace elements. Jerry is also a big fan, or likes the idea of different trace elements helping out your tree. Different fertilizers will have different trace elements in them sometimes. So he doesn't feed his trees with the exact same thing. So maybe this week he's going to feed it with Miracle Grow. Maybe the next time he feeds it, he's going to use something else, Osmocote or whatever. But he would go through and cycle and mix up what he's feeding his trees, as opposed to using one thing all the time. Because in that way, his theory was, it always, it basically giving your tree a balanced diet, mixing up its diet. I like doing that same sort of thing. So what I tend to do on my trees, I admit, I do like using a lot of slow release pellets, of which I will use. I also personally like foliar feeding my trees, where I'm spraying directly on my foliage. Really tend to green it up. So a lot of times I'm using slow release pellets down in my soil. For my tropicals, I'm usually using Miracle Grow at houseplant strength, and I'm just with a pump sprayer, and I'm spraying my leaves with that. But even then, that's not the only thing I use. Like 1 week, I'll spray it with that. The next week, what I like using is, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Neptune's Harvest before, but it's a kelp-based spray. So like 1 week I'll do it with the Neptune's Harvest, and then the other week I'll do it with Miracle Grow. So I'll switch back and forth between those. In any case, when I'm doing them, I'm doing it at houseplant strength. But that's basically it. As far as other organic kind of fertilizers and stuff like that, personally, they work well most of the time, like your fish emulsions or different things like that. But depending on where you live, sometimes they have a habit of attracting, your friendly neighborhood raccoon or possum or something like that.
They do.
Yeah, so I tend to stay away from the organics because I just don't like the critters that they bring in. So it's not a question of whether or not they work, because I do think they work fine. They just don't work fine in my yard because of, other critters that want to chew on stuff or make a mess or whatever. So, yeah, I don't use them as much. If you're in a neighborhood or an area where that's maybe less of an issue, then probably you'd be all right with those if you chose to use them. I personally do not, though. But once again, I'm always, use what works well for you. That's the main thing.
So folks, we're getting close to the end. Almost running out of tickets. So now's the time.
Are we paying dues
Wait
tonight?
to be the last one.
If you have dues, yes, you will accept dues.
Okay.
But yes, dues are due. It's $45 this year. This month is great. Or you can see me on. There will be.
Yeah, I went 45 in dues and 5 on there. That is 45, right?
Well, seeing that I'm running kind of low on time here, it looks like I'm probably not going to be able to completely detail wire out the top. But the truth is, a lot of it is going to back bud and fill back in. And a lot of it you can just do with trimming at the top. As long as we have our other branches basically set, and have everything pretty well where we want them. With a rounded crown on a deciduous tree, yeah, I won't necessarily have to worry about detail wire and all of the top. Or if I've got more time on, somebody can also bring this thing over, whoever wins it or goes on with it. It's like, yeah, bring it on Saturday. I could maybe have some time to work more on the top if we need to.
I'm not one of those.
So I know we're starting to kind of run out of time. Does anybody else have any other questions about Jaboticaba or tropicals in general or anything else? Or hopefully I've covered a fair amount with you guys anyway.
I have a question.
Sure.
About a year and a half ago, I had a mahogany.
Okay.
Uh,
Tropical mahogany. You know, I have never personally had a tropical mahogany. I mean, now it's a compound leaf tree, correct? You know, so I've had several of its close cousins, like the Texas ebonies and stuff like that. They're ones that, like I said, obviously I put everything like that outside for the summertime. Most of those with the compound leaf kind of trees, which would include like Brazilian rain tree, Texas ebony, powder puffs, and stuff like that, are trees that, in my opinion, what I consider, and this sounds like such a cop out, medium light. You know, when I'm talking about medium light, my bonsai garden is a square, say so to speak, or whatever. I've got one corner of it that's a really high sun area, and the other opposite corner it gets shade for a good chunk of the day. So in my, like, say my one side that gets the most shade is where I'm tending to put things like the like parrot's beaks and Fukian tea and I'm trying to think of another, like Schiffler or Hawaiian umbrella tree, to where my opposite corner is where I tend to put things that tend to have really small leaves that like to be a little higher sun, like your dwarf jades, the basitas, which are the dwarf black olives, like the really high sun. Most of those Brazilian rain trees and stuff like that are ones that, you know, in the other compound leaf type of trees are usually ones where I like to try to have them in sun till, let's say, from, you know, morning up to maybe 2 o'clock and so in the afternoon where I have them set. But by then, usually they're getting into more of the shade of the day. I wouldn't want them, you know, baking out in full sun on a day like today or anything like that. So that's what usually what I'm talking about, is putting them in what I consider the medium light things. So most of that kind of tree, you know, or ones, like I said, you know, even though I don't have the mahoganies, but most of those are cousins to one another, and at least all the cousins that I have are the ones that usually, like I said, morning sun, light up till about 2 o'clock or so, and then I have put them in an area where they're getting some shade. So I hope that answers your question, at least what I do with the closest things to that. Sea grape is one. I've never had one before. I don't like them. You know, and I mean, and the reason why I'm just saying I personally don't like them doesn't necessarily mean they're bad trees to grow or anything like that. I think the leaves are too large, in my opinion. So because they're just trees that don't appeal to my personal like, I've never owned one because the leaves, in my opinion, always look just too big. So I wish I could tell you some more about them. You know, like I would, if you had any questions, I'd talk to somebody like an Eric Weigert or somebody like that. You know, email or ask him, because, you know, I mean, he grows them and sells them, so I'm sure he'd tell you that they're awesome. But, you know, but myself personally, I just think the leaves are too big, so I don't like them. But you're free to like them if you want. Don't, you know, that's you know, so, you know, just, you know, that's opinion, but also, you know, opinion, because I admit if I see something that I like and I have it in my collection and I'm doing good, sure, I'm going to want to sell them. If I see something that I don't want in my own collection, I'm not going to bother having them, because, you know, I probably don't want to sell them, work with them, do anything, just because it's just not my thing. You know, I mean, it's, so like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad, just means that I think the leaves are too big, so I don't like them. So call me a leaf snob, I guess. I don't know. But
A comment on the Brazilian rain trees. I like mine in full sun. They are in their natural habitat. They grow really tall, and so they are used to getting full sun at the top of the canopy.
I've got a jade question.
yeah.
I've got it's not a dwarf jade, it's just a regular jade, it's some leaf size. They're getting black spots in the leaf. Any suggestions?
Well, I said, yeah, he is right. Sometimes black spots that I see in those is an insect, like a scale is, you know, of which I would spray for it. I've never really seen they're not ones that tend to get a lot of. I mean, you don't really usually have to worry too much about like fungal type of things. So I wouldn't think it's necessarily fungal or anything like that. Yeah, I would say bug problem would be the highest chance. Now, are they just getting spots? Are they not turning yellow and falling off or doing anything? Or
I haven't followed them all the way. It doesn't happen quick or at high quantity.
okay,
Bring one Saturday.
okay, yeah, I'll take a look at it. I don't, because really, as far as a lot of the jades go, not the only thing I use for bonsai, which I do use them a lot though. I mean, it is the dwarf African jade, the standard like this, you know, which, and the one I like using are the more rough bark varieties. But I do use the variegates also. I like the variegated ones. Some people aren't as into the variegates just because the variegates are slower growing trees. But if you're patient, they actually make pretty nice bonsai. You just have to be a little more patient. But that's all right. Well, since it's about 9 o'clock, like I said, I might try to finish out a little bit of that later on. But I think pretty much I'm at a pretty good stopping point right now, to where this crown's going to fill itself out naturally. You know, I've got, you know, the pads pretty well set where they want. So it's like right now, it's just a matter of just fertilizing this dude, letting it grow, and you know. You could pot it this year still if you wanted to, you know, I mean, or you, like I said, you can let it go for a bit and it'll probably bounce back a little faster. But truth is, you probably have until mid-August to pot this thing, really, if you wanted to. So probably about a 14-inch diameter pot. So I'd probably say, you know, 14, 4 inches deep. You know, that's about what I would put it into. So now for, you know, more often than not, you know, I would put it in something that's usually glazed. I like them in glazed more, but at the same time, you know, I mean, you could put it in unglazed too. I just like my deciduous and my tropicals in glazed a little more often, but I do have some in unglazed too. You know, you find the right pot, it would be all right. You know, I mean, I think this is a tree that would probably fall more feminine and stuff like that. So I wouldn't use a really rough-edged pot. You know, I'd use something a little more at the rounded corners or whatever. You know, honestly, I like rounded rectangles a lot personally, because honestly, a rounded rectangle, some of them, you know, you can get away with a masculine or a feminine tree, you know, having a rounded rectangle pot, and they're usually all right. So yeah, I would say probably, you know, oval or rounded rectangle. But at the same time, if you're a winner and it's your tree, and at the end of the day, no bonsai police are going to come and pick up your tree if they don't like the pot that you put it in. So so yeah, whatever floats your boat. But yeah, that's all I would put it in though. So.
Well, thank you. Any last minute purchases before we draw? All right. Good luck to everybody who bought tickets. And Scott, if I can get you to draw one there.
Certainly.
Thank you, sir.
There you go.
Are you guys ready?
Yep.
424 633. 633. That'd be somebody. That's you.
Hey. Well.
Hope you're taking notes.
Oh yeah, sure. You can grab my card, you know, and because honestly, I always tell people to, you know, my business kind of depends on happy people and live trees and all. So yeah, if you ever need help with it, you know, or whatever, you know, but it's a nice tree. I think you have some fun with it. So.
This type of tree reminds me of the sycamore trees.
It does, yeah. I mean, as far as the bark structure is very similar to it, but something like a sycamore, you would never get the leaves to reduce, to where these have really nice leaves, you know, and stuff like that. Yeah.